This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. Today we'll be bidding a fond farewell to Burt Reynolds, the charismatic movie star who made such an indelible impression on the X-Files in episode 13 of season 9. I'm your host, Paige Schechter, and with me today is X-Cast patron, the amazing Marlene Stemme. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this.
I am too. It's one of my, I don't want to say where it places in the latter years, but it's one of my favorite episodes overall. So, I'm sad about Burt Reynolds' death, but I'm glad that we are not having to wait until I think it's like 2022 when Tony has scheduled to record the official Improbable cast. So, we'll have a little bit of that discussion with the Burt Reynolds discussion.
Excellent. Okay, so before we get into the meat of, like you said, one of the highlights of season 9, let's talk a bit about this legend, Burt Reynolds. He became a huge superstar in the 70s with movies like Smokey and the Bandit and its sequels, Cannonball Run and its sequel, White Lightning and its sequel Gator. He likes sequels. Deliverance, The Longest Yard, Hooper, The End, and many more. And then he had kind of a renaissance in the 90s, particularly with his Emmy-winning role on the TV series Evening Shade and his Oscar-nominated role as a porn director in Boogie Nights. So, do you have any favorite non-X-Files Burt Reynolds roles?
Well, I have to say I haven't seen too many of his films. I've watched, I think that I've just known about him, obviously like my entire life. He's just kind of been that sort of icon of a type of actor, I guess. I don't necessarily gravitate to some of the earlier stuff. I think some of the comedies I probably have enjoyed what I've seen of them, but the sort of very suave, masculine characters just, are not exactly my cup of tea. And I also think that I was watching, when I was little, I was probably watching older movies. So I sort of came into seeing him when he was doing more work that was almost like a take or a variation on his persona, sort of like either guest starring as himself. I remember, this is like kind of way off the X-Files track, but I remember an episode of The Golden Girls that he was on as Mr. Burt Reynolds. And then some of the later things that he did when he was older and had, I don't know, I like the things that had a little bit of a quirk to them about him. I think he has that, and I think I like that when that comes across. So that's not a very specific answer, but that's kind of the style of his performance that I enjoy. One thing that I remember from my childhood seeing was Switching Channels.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that one? The
Yes.
comedy with Kathleen Turner and Christopher Reeve, I think.
Right.
And he was kind of zany in that, too. And I remember that I really liked that.
Well, that's a one of the endless lines of remakes of His Girl Friday and and the one that came before that, whose name totally escapes me at the moment.
The Front Page, I think.
The Front Page, yes.
You should know, The Front Page.
Oh, my goodness,
right?
yeah. Okay. And because I'm such a fan of those movies that I can't remember the name of, it was kind of hard to take Switching Channels because I didn't really think it worked quite the way that those work. But like you said, he has this affable personality, and that's what makes it sort of compelling to watch him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm definitely a child of the 70s, so the Smokey and the Bandits, especially the first one, but I saw the second one like a cajillion times on HBO. That's how we used to movie watch back in the day. And the Cannonball Runs are still very close to my heart. Gator was the first movie I saw at a drive-in. Did you ever actually go to a drive-in?
I have been to a drive-in maybe 2 or 3 times across my life.
Drive-ins are fun.
I don't think I've seen a Burt Reynolds movie at a drive-in.
No, you're missing something if you don't know. I think they should reopen drive-ins just so we could all have a Burt Reynolds film retrospective.
Fest.
Yes, exactly. I thought Boogie Nights was an incredible performance. I wish he had won the Academy Award for it, but he lost to Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, so I
Oh,
can't
that's right.
feel too
Yeah.
bad about that.
Oh,
Everyone should check out The Last Movie Star, though. It's one of the last things he did. It's on Amazon Prime and just shows his magic never went away. And I love how he plays off of it, which is something he does. He plays off his personality, what he's known for,
hmm.
in things like The Golden Girls and, as we're going to see, in The X-Files. And he does it amazingly well in The Last Movie Star, so I highly
Oh,
recommend
that's
that.
great. A lot of his movies, it seems like, had to do with like what I know of his life. I think that he have like a football injury that curtailed
Yes.
a potential sports career, and then he kind of made his. And I don't know exactly how he made his way into acting from that, but I would imagine you could
Well,
speak more to that. But I've noticed a lot of his movies have either that exact plot line, and I think Evening Shade even has some aspect of that in it.
mhm.
And I think that that's another sort of way that his life is coming into the role. So it's more like his actual life, and then later on his persona that is kind of becomes part of his ongoing character, which I thought was kind of fun and interesting.
Right. Okay, well, that segs into what I was about to say, and that's my incredible tie to Burt Reynolds, which is
Oh,
it's not direct. It goes through a third person, the man both of us consider the best teacher we ever had. Watson B. Duncan III was this amazing, inspiring, larger than life professor. And he taught English literature and drama and speech at Palm Beach Junior College. And he could just hold a room full of 200 people captivated with his interpretations of classic literary works. I was particularly fond of how he embodied Cressida, the lead female in William Shakespeare's tragedy Troilus and Cressida.
huh.
Anyway, I interviewed Duncan once for the school newspaper. He was voted Teacher of the Year more times than I could count, and eventually the college's theater and the middle school were named after him. And he told me how he helped Burt Reynolds get into acting. Now, Burt, as you
Oh,
mentioned, was a standout football player at Florida State University, but injuries put an end to his career, and that's when Watson B. Duncan came into the picture. He saw this spark in him. He saw what we all eventually got to see and sort of pressured him into doing theater. And a star was born, and Burt always gave him due credit for that afterward, too. So
hmm.
that's my big connection with Burt Reynolds.
Oh, that's interesting. This is not anywhere near that interesting, but I met somebody recently at work that is a movie who had worked in movies as a producer and then is an actor, like a longtime actor on the People's Court. I don't know if you remember that show, but he lives in North Carolina now, I think. And he said that he moved there. It was because of Burt Reynolds, and then he told me the story about his daughter being in theater and all of this other stuff. And so that was really interesting and kind of coincidental because it was just about a month ago, that this happened. So that's funny because I hadn't thought about Burt Reynolds in a little while, and then that came up. So
Right.
apparently he's having an influence or had an influence.
Okay, now let's talk about how he's influenced many X-Files fans.
Okay.
So, on the credits, he's listed as Mr. Burt, but hey, we know who he's supposed to be, and if he didn't, Chris Carter laid it all out on the previously mentioned commentary track for Improbable. He's
Yes.
God.
God.
So, what do you think of the casting of Burt Reynolds as God?
I thought it was inspired. I don't think that's necessarily the obvious choice, and I don't think that he played that part necessarily in the obvious way. And not that there's an obvious way to play God, but I think that one of the things that I had noticed or that I wrote in my notes from the watch of the commentary track was Chris Carter talking about working with Burt Reynolds. And he talked a lot about working with Burt Reynolds. But one thing that he said is that Burt Reynolds came to him and had ideas on how to play the character. And he said, I think you should just be Burt Reynolds and bring your charm to the character. And I think that could probably go a number of ways, but I think it went in a very sincere way in his portrayal of God in this episode. And one thing I noted was that I think that Burt Reynolds does a really good job with what emotion there is in the role. Just like some of his facial expressions and the things he says, he has like the twinkle in his eye that Chris Carter mentioned and that we all can see. but he also, there's a sense of sorrow too. He kind of is showing God's sorrow as well as his joy with life and with humans. And that's really, a lot of what that episode is about, is trying to teach the character of Mad Wayne. And then so like in his joy when people do figure things out and play the game well, and his sorrow when they make poor choices. And you can kind of see in his face that he's, going through that experience and really conveying it, but still conveying it in a lighthearted episode in a way that's not too heavy-handed. And I think it's very fitting. And so I think it was an interesting casting choice. But I also think it kind of brought something to what Chris Carter is trying to say about God, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. The way he sets it up is he lays out through numerology and these games direction. God is everywhere. God is among
Right.
us, and he's showing us things through games, through music, through this bright, happy music.
Mm-hmm.
He's showing us, but leaving us with free will.
Right, to create or to destroy. I think that was a great part, and to appreciate creation or not. And he talked as well. Chris Carter talked about the wardrobe, which I'm sure we all, noticed the kind of zany floral clothes that Burt Reynolds was wearing. And
Right.
I thought it suited Burt Reynolds as God wearing that, but it also, Chris Carter talks about God appreciating what people have done with the elements that were given to them by God, and that they continue to create past his vision of creation. I thought that was a really, really interesting thought. And also, he said something about how it was so crazy that even God wouldn't dream it up, or so unexpected, but that God would be delighted by that. So I don't think he meant it necessarily in a theological way, but it's just a very interesting take on that. And I think I don't think it could have worked with anyone but Burt Reynolds, kind of portraying that and wearing those floral shirts throughout the episode.
Well, I was going to bring up favorite character traits, and that's one of them. And like you just said, Chris said, God laid this all out for us, but then we take it in places that God hadn't imagined. And that's what's so interesting and thought-provoking about the whole episode. You may not believe in numerology, or you may not get your information from them through numerology, but there are like a myriad of ways where you can. How many times have you listened to a piece of music, or say, that old thing where your favorite song comes on the radio, back when we used to listen to radio, or you would
Right.
hear your favorite song just when you needed it most, or
Oh,
a
yes.
favorite movie would come on television, and it sort of hints that way.
I hadn't thought about that before, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I have that thing, and I think I still try to listen to the radio just, for those occasions, or if I am somewhere where radio is playing. That's happened many times, and I'm very skeptical in the Scully sense, I guess, about, like how that would be a coincidence or whatnot. But I don't know, because I have my one thing that I can't sort of shake, that is a song that's that happens or comes on, in sort of times of strife, or at least that's my interpretation of it. So I can see that, and the idea of it being a pattern is interesting too, and that there is some sort of underlying structure to it.
Right. And I think this episode, and particularly, gave Monica Reyes some room to breathe in on the canvas, because she did believe in these things, and she was more open to it. And the person that Mr. Burt, or God, connects with the most on the canvas here is Monica Reyes, because she is open to these things, and she is seeing in the checkerboard, red, black.
Right. That's really interesting. I don't want to, again, I feel like there are a lot of directions that I hadn't even thought of about this, because I hadn't thought that he connected the best with her, or the most with her. But I totally see that now that you mention it. And I think that he sort of connects with Scully in a different way, but it's almost in a way that goes to her her struggles with her religion, maybe. And I don't think that's part of the script, or part of necessarily something you have to keep in mind working, or watching the episode, that she's working through that. But I think it's almost a combative, interaction that she has with him, and that he kind of has with her. It's a little more challenging, where he's a little bit more on board with what Monica is doing.
I think he appreciates that in Scully. I think he really appreciates, just like, the old way Mulder used to be challenged by Scully, here God is
Hmm.
kind of challenged by Scully. And
Yeah.
Monica, I love how he supports her in the big garage scene, you go girl, that sort of
Yes, yes.
thing. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, Scully, who thinks you can't know everything and you certainly can't know it from numbers laid out in front of you, points out something that the God character also points out, the uncertainty factor, that
Mhm.
luck plays a part in it. Everything is not predestined because the uncertainty comes into play.
Right. And I think that's set up in the very beginning, in the scene in the casino. It goes over sort of like all of those, like the sort of nascent form of all of those variables, like God's playing solitaire, I guess.
Hmm.
And and then of course, like he's dealing certain cards that have some like certain meaning, and like two card players, like the death card, I guess. And then there's another card later on. I'm sure I wrote it down somewhere that has some other meaning to it. So of course that's going to be significant in there. But the whole thing being like the cards being a certain genetic hand or a numerological hand, or just like what you have to work with. And then in the commentary, Chris Carter's talking about Burt Reynolds trying to guide Mad Wayne into making a better choice, and to, what is it he says, in like, you're gonna walk out of here and show me this street or something like that, and encouraging him to sort of go against his bad impulses. And then he talks about the young woman that loses her paycheck every week, and how he hopes her luck is going to change. So it kind of sets up all of those different things right there at the outset.
Right. I love how he's really directly trying to affect Matt Wayne. But there are also ways he's indirectly affecting everybody else with the numbers and the music and that
Mm.
sort of thing. But here we see he's trying to make a difference. And as Chris Carter said in the commentary, this isn't the first time he's tried to steer this guy down the right path.
Right.
This guy just doesn't want to budge, and that could
Mhm.
be, is that part of his genetics, Matt Wayne's genetics, where he can't be moved off the course of his actions. It really
Yeah.
so it's such a fun and lively episode, but it's got really deep thoughts in it. If you're open to it and looking at it. If
Mhm.
you're not, you can still enjoy the episode, which is something that's great about it.
I agree. Because I like it on that deeper level, but then if I just wanted to watch it and have fun, like you said, you can do that as well. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Like some episodes are, one or the other, I think. I mean, I find the ones that I enjoy the most are the ones where you can appreciate them on multiple levels like that. And I remember when I first watched it, and I know this because I have notes from my very first viewing when it came on, that let's see, I kind of thought, and this is before I'd heard the commentary or like really thought about it that much. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed like all the things we've talked about what Burt Reynolds is bringing to the character of God and how he's teaching through games and so forth. But I sort of thought that aside from him, the episode was a little bit of a weaker version of Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose.
Hmm.
That's just a little more sublime, I think. But then it's not, Chris Carter doesn't have the same style. And I think he kind of came into his own style, at some point before he did this episode. So now I appreciate it more just on its own. But I think at that time I just kind of looked, I was like, well, he's trying to do the whole like choice and coincidence and fate idea, and it's just not as smooth. But that's just the nature. He talks about it being kind of a cartoony episode, and there is something cartoony about having Burt Reynolds play God. And again, like you can look at it, it's fun, but you also can really look at the like more involved things in that, and the sort of the sense of joy, and all the other things that make that a great casting choice and make it an episode that you can think about.
Right. Well, you brought up Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose, and I think there are a lot of, if not callbacks, at least things that remind us of it, like the profiling scene is something where you look at and you go, oh
Yeah.
yeah, we kind of know
Yeah.
how that works and how that should work. And I think again there is some play, there's Chris Carter playing with that. He this is what we know and what we expect, and this is what he's giving us the variation on it. I love the way those elements get combined together here. one thing I definitely wanted to bring up was the great dancing scene
Oh yes.
in the garage where, he's dancing, the women are playing checkers,
Playing checkers, yeah,
and
and trying to focus on that, I'm sure.
shakes his ass right in front of the camera, and then Jillian as Dana, of course, has the greatest reaction to him doing that.
Yeah. And I would say that their performances are appropriately understated. They do a really good job because it looks like they're in the same scene, but they're doing one thing and he's doing something totally different. And it goes together, but like they're just very focused on the game of checkers, that they didn't want to play in the first place. But I just thought all of that was just somehow it was natural and it was earnest, the way they all performed.
I think Reyes was very focused because it kind of felt like she was trying to figure things out, and Dana's
Mhm.
very distracted. Scully's very distracted by him dancing around.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
heard,
guess focus like that's true. I think like the actresses are focused on the scene, because you sort of have to at some point get over the fact that Burt Reynolds is dancing around in a floral shirt in front of you.
yeah,
Um,
I think at some point they had to stop tape a couple times because Jillian couldn't get through that, which is
I
in
read that too.
which is in direct opposition to how Scully is supposed to be reacting to
Right.
this man.
Yeah. And of that, I have here that when I was watching it, Chris Carter said that Burt Reynolds worked long hours through these scenes. He had a lot to do. He spent most of the time down on set with the crew, and that he was very accommodating and worked very hard. And he talks about how he had to do kind of crazy things like singing and dancing, and that he had to do very un-Burt Reynolds like things, and he wanted to practice those because those weren't necessarily something that he was accustomed to doing. And so that's the whole thing about he's making use of his persona, but at the same time he's like letting him kind of go beyond that, I think. But he just talked about how hard he worked and how he really wanted to like get the things right and do like sort of imbue that character with what Chris Carter wanted him to have. So I thought that was he talks about it at length too. So I thought that was a pretty significant point of like why, because I think that Burt Reynolds had wanted to be on the X-Files, from what I understand, and kind of lobbied to be on the show. And I like that Chris Carter it seems like he really chose a part for him that we could make the best use that he could of what he could bring to
Well,
that role.
that leads me to what Robert Patrick's post was on social media after Burt Reynolds passed, and it references that. So another good segue by you.
Oh, good.
He,
I'm glad.
he of course was very sad at the news of Burt's passing. He said he was one of his film heroes. He used to go to his movies in the 70s, and it was an honor to get to share the screen with him. And he had dinner with Burt one night while he was on The X-Files and asked if Burt would come do an episode. So Chris Carter created a very specific role for him. And he said, it was such a joy to get to work with him again. Burt gave me a cool watch and a sterling silver belt buckle with a large R on it.
Yeah.
He was a bigger than life character for sure. Rest in peace, Burt Reynolds. I am grateful for the time I spent with you.
Hmm.
And then let me add Annabeth's as long as we're on this subject.
Yeah.
She said, what fun to have once worked with the legend himself, and that the legend was in fact playing God.
Oh, that's great.
I'm just glad it gave Reyes, some color, brought her out a little on the canvas, because it really is in all of her episodes. It's one of the ones where they really give her, there's no boundaries. She gets to move
Right.
and flow and come up with theories. And like earlier in the episode where everybody at the FBI is applauding her for figuring these
Mm-hmm.
things out, and they're all excited, and she tells them how she did it, and they get less excited because she's given them the theories, the
Right.
numerology, and they're like, that's not
And
really how it
Sully's
goes.
face in that part is great too.
Yeah, so
Um,
he really draws her out in this episode.
I agree with you, and I was thinking that when you read the comment from Annabeth about Burt Reynolds' death, I was like, that really is the episode where I think that we see the most of what her character potential was. And I mean, as we've talked, like you and I have talked before, like I'm not that fond of those like later seasons. I think I get the purpose they serve and so forth, but I'm most attached to her character by far in Improbable. And it's just that synergy of how they all work together. And I think she comes across as a very strong character, but in a great way that's very, like in keeping with her personality and her strengths, as I guess as an investigator, but just also in terms of like the background, and she's kind of unabashed in everything that she's bringing to the table, whether it's the numerology or, like her investigative procedure, anything like that. And like, I think that's probably, I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons why Burt Reynolds / God, really is drawn to her, is because she is so, earnest in what she's doing. Like there's nothing, like no subterfuge to her. And
Right.
I think that he, his character in all of his other comments, he really likes that sort of, just like openness, I guess. Not openness, that's not the right word, but just like the genuineness of it.
And then, of course, she gets the great line at the end, she's on the phone with Scully. Who was that man?
Mm-hmm.
God knows.
God knows. Yeah. I really like that. I like that Scully is a 9, and then it's Monica Reyes that tells her that her number is a 9, and that she's evolved through all of the other numbers to an understanding that, that this life is part of a greater whole or something like that. I thought Scully's life at that point, that was suitable. And I thought it was interesting that Monica said it to her, because the episode kind of goes from the 3s to the 6s to the 9 at the end, in terms of the numerical patterns. Mm-hmm. And even the games that Burt Reynolds is playing kind of move through that. And so the episode's moving through the numerology. And then also when Scully's curiosity gets the better of her at the end, and she's asking Monica about that, that's what it comes to. And then she says, who is that man? Right after that, she learns that she's numerologically a 9, and then they're talking about God. So it's an interesting combination of ideas, but I think it really works.
I definitely agree about that. Although I think I'm probably more of a dogged, where, like when you say these things of what a 9 means, and earlier when Reyes explains what a 6 means to dogged, really anybody can see themselves in the description there, So It kind of seems like, well, okay, I fit that, and okay, I kind of fit that too,
Yeah.
My personality is on the dogged side here, where I'm trying to see what they see in it, and I'm not seeing quite as much as Reyes does, but I'm believing more than Scully does.
Okay, I get that.
So
I think it's some of it's wishful interpretation, but I know in the commentary, Chris Carter said that all the numerology was correct in terms of being, I guess, as accurate or precise numerology, that if somebody, ran those numbers numerologically, that they would come out to be correct. Like they didn't just make up numbers. So that did not surprise me that he had made sure the numerology was correct.
I like how he combined two things that don't really seem to fit. Like he's got the theoretical and quantum physics going, and his brother, the MIT professor W. Craig Carter, helped him develop for the show, and at the same time he was into poker and watching the players trying to do and trying to do the same thing scientists are doing, which is figure out the game, in this case God's game.
Right.
And so your ability to look into or not look into the numbers really affects, how you make your decisions.
Right. And then he also talked with, more about the music and the rhythm and like the rhythms of like music and of life and so forth, and taking piano lessons. He talks a lot in the whole episode about the things he's learned. And it seems like if he just, spit them out, it would be this mishmash, but somehow combining them in this story, they all seem to go together. I think sometimes in his episodes they don't, or we don't see how they go together, but I think in this they really do. So somehow like the numerology and the God aspect really work together. And the poker and the music and the science, like all of that, without watering down any of it. That's the thing, is that I don't think any of the ideas are dumbed down. I think it's just kind of picking that overarching theme that makes them work.
I think this is one of those episodes where you definitely can see it a lot better the second time around, the third time around, fourth time around, rather than the first time where you go, what is this? And, they're all singing at the end, and what is that about? And,
Right.
and now we know it was a tribute to the San Gennaro Festival because it was canceled after 9/11. But at the time, you're like, this is the X-Files?
It
What?
seems odd.
Um,
Right.
but now, when you can see all these different factors working in it, and Burt Reynolds' great performance, like tying it all together, it really is a much more brilliant and even more accessible episode than I found it to be the first time I watched it.
I totally agree because even though I really liked it the first time that I watched it, the ending I thought was fun and jovial, but I was like, this is just a little strange, But then the idea of it all coming together and being a celebration, it makes sense through watching the episode again, and then also through Chris Carter talking about how the San Gennaro Festival was the celebration of life and of appreciating the beauty of God's creation as he's describing it through science and through art and so forth. And it's not that it has to make sense like in a plot way, but it just all makes sense as an expression of what he was trying to tell in that story, I think.
Right. And then the big pullback to, the big image of Burt Reynolds, and it's just gorgeous, that last shot.
And a little twinkle in his eye as they pull back and he's everywhere. Yeah. I have a question for you though.
Oh, all right.
Okay, so the one thing, and maybe I'm missing it completely, the one thing that still doesn't make sense to me is I think it's the moment before the final act that starts in the parking garage before the lights go off, when Scully looks at Burt Reynolds and she says, "What are you looking at?" And he says, "Same thing you are." And then the lights go out. I still don't know what that means. And I don't know if I don't know. So what do you think that means?
I'm not sure. I think my immediate reaction to that is he's looking at the greater picture, which is what Scully's trying to do.
Okay.
They're both looking at the world, as it were, and
Okay.
he's got more insight into it than she does, but
Right.
they're both sort of looking at that picture. That's how I always sort of thought of it. I don't know if that's what Chris Carter meant, and I'm sure we'll get lots of response to this on what we actually said wrong.
Oh,
but
right.
it's all of it, and this particular episode is interpretation. You get a lot out of it. It's a personal reaction to it, and that's another good reason for everybody to take another glance at it, even if you maybe didn't like it so much the first time. Not just to see this incredible guest performance, but to see what you get out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think everyone should watch it for the incredible guest performance, first of all. But I think I could see some people that aren't, that are skeptical of, just like the ideas or the patterns of numerology, or that maybe aren't interested in theology or religion. And I happen to be, so I find all of it very fascinating. But like maybe, like thinking it's silly that Burt Reynolds is God, like just look at the bigger picture of it, or just kind of like get more out of the pageantry of the whole episode, And again, like you can do that and appreciate it more, and then like not have to parse apart the ideas, or you can really get into it and, and think about all of it a little bit more.
Right. Okay, let's take a look at the mailbag and see what some of the other fans in the X-Files basement had to say. We'll start with Michelle Milbauer, who was supposed to join us today but couldn't because of some vacation plans that got switched around. But she said she found Burt Reynolds playing this character to be a really charming, charismatic man that really seemed to love whatever he was doing. And I think she's right. I think an important part of it is how much he's reveling in what's going on. He's got to live with these things that go on that maybe are not playing out the way he'd like them to, but that's the game, and he's following the game, and he's enjoying the game.
Right. And the level at which he is going to intervene or not. Because you mentioned earlier that like what he's doing is affecting other people, and it's affecting them positively, but it's putting a weight out there, It's a really interesting comment.
Okay, Kalichi Ehenulo. Sorry if I butchered your name. He said, the dancing, the smile, the charm, the grace, the legend that is Burt Reynolds. Easily one of the better episodes from season 9, and was overjoyed that an actor I grew up watching back in Smoking the Bandit made it to my favorite TV show. It's good fun, and the parking lot scene still cracks me up. So season 9, where does this place for you?
Oh, it's absolutely my favorite of season 9. There's nothing else even close. And I don't mean that in a like a negative way. Like I really loved the episode, and it was sort of like a spark that was lit that made me look at some of the other things or have more enthusiasm, I think, when that episode first came on. And then it's the one that I go back to again and again, and that I show to people that are fans of the show that may not have they may like really enjoy it, but may not like really, look into the episodes, or may not have like, say, listened to the commentary track, or that are, sort of like, what? Burt Reynolds is God? That's weird. I'm like, no, watch the episode and kind of, see how this rolls out, because I think it was very inspired. And so, like, to me, that's, it was also, like you said, it was so, I guess, like the best use of Monica Correa's. I think Scully's great in it. I think they both, that sort of like counterpoint of opposites. I think to me that comes across the best in a non-Mulder and Scully episode that I've seen too. It's the best use of that sort of like back and forth dialectic that wasn't Mulder and Scully. And so I really enjoy that as well. And I enjoy how Burt Reynolds plays into that a little bit in a fun way in the parking garage. So it's, absolutely at the top of my list.
Right. Okay, let's see what else we have.
How about you?
In season 9, well, I have great affection for season 9. There are like 5 episodes that are among my favorite of the whole series run, and this one is right in there, right in the mix. But particularly now, watching it again, it affects me more. And like I said, I have a different reaction than I once had. And you don't usually change too much of your opinion when you rewatch episodes. You pretty much, if you liked it, you pretty much still like it. And if you didn't like it, you're pretty much jumping over it and not watching it. This is one that my opinion actually changed about over time.
Okay.
It wasn't that I didn't like it, I just didn't get it. I didn't see everything until I looked at it again. Okay, let's see. Okay, Fred Bradiker has a very nice and long response, so get comfortable. Um, I've always loved the choreography, the use of 3, the music, the whimsy. I loved the first time I watched it, and that feeling of who the hell is Bert supposed to be? What does he know about this guy? Is he toying with him? Can he read minds? He calls him horrible, but says he loves him anyway. Is he God? He seems like a god, a fatherly, though slightly impish god. When I showed it to my born-again stepmom last week, she was all, so he knows what that guy's going to do, but he won't stop him, and I told her he was God, and she thought about it a second, then understood. No more questions. She gets free will.
Oh, that's great.
I love that. I love frustrated Scully in the garage telling God to keep his hands up. Why? I don't know. Never mind the irony of her close encounter with her deity there. It makes me wonder if Mulder would have recognized who it was. But anyway, yes, the garage, Scully shooting at the lock. Why didn't they just use Bert's car to activate the exit gate? The checkers thing, it was funny because I was musing about how Reyes and Scully were playing the wrong colors right before Reyes' little epiphany, so I felt special. Yeah, that does bring up a question. What do you think? Do you think Mulder would have been, in on this? Would he have figured it out?
Oh, I think that's a really interesting question. I have to wonder if it would be one of those times when Mulder recognizes the phenomenon and the abilities and how unusual someone or something is, but doesn't necessarily understand the personal side of it, or I'm not explaining this, but like the meaning of it, like what God is. He might not understand God's intent, but he might understand that it's God, or that it's, some force that's acting on these characters. I think that he would recognize that first off, but I don't know that he would necessarily grasp the meaning of it. Whereas I think Scully might understand the meaning, but be reluctant to admit who it was.
Right. Well, Mulder was never good at the religious ones, the ones that had
Yeah.
religious implications, all, sort of, that's a scam. And,
Yeah.
so,
Or he sees the like the paranormal part and not necessarily like what that, person, or if you could consider in this case God is personified, um, is intending to do. And he gets very excited about, the phenomenon itself, but not necessarily the meaning behind it. And I feel like Scully reacts kind of in a little bit more of the opposite way. So that would be interesting if we could see that side of it too.
right. I'm sure, David was upset that he didn't get to interact with Burt Reynolds, because that
I
would have
hope so.
been really interesting scene to see David Duchovny and Burt Reynolds, but
And Burt Reynolds.
who have sort of a similar mischievous eye thing going on, and quirky, and
Yeah.
it would have been fun to see them play off each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And to see how those conversations went, I think, with the three of them as well.
And I also wish Doggett sort of had more interaction with him, because he doesn't really. He passes him by, and
Mhm.
he comes in at the tail end of the garage scene. And so
Yeah.
there's not. I would have liked to, Doggett versus God.
I think that's fitting. And I'm going to confess I'm no expert on Doggett's character because I just haven't seen those episodes nearly as many. Well, I mean, but exponentially fewer times. I've seen most of the other ones. But it seems fitting for what I know of his character that he would be. I think is it the Dominoes game when he passes by and he kind of
Yes.
smirks or smiles and keeps going, and then he comes in at the end, and there are all these various like these scenes where he catches a glimpse. And then I don't think he's dismissive. I think that, he appreciates it, but it's just kind of like he moves on with his life. And I think that's sort of like what we see of him in other episodes too, just how he processes things. So
Right.
it would have been interesting, but I thought it was perfectly fitting for his character to just be in those like kind of bygone moments.
Right. And I love how when he starts to figure out things, he's trying to get the others at the FBI to understand. And so
Hmm.
he's further along the timeline than they are. And he's
Right.
a little bit more open, thanks to what he has had to deal with Scully and Reyes, than the rest of
Right.
them are.
And Chris Carter in the little commentary says that he's talking about like maybe that's what it is to be successful, is to see how the numbers and the patterns go together, and that Doggett is doing what successful people do and looking deeper into the mysteries. So it's definitely, he's definitely an important part of the case, and it's a positive portrayal. I just don't think that he's not going to get involved in this philosophical debate that Scully and Reyes would have
Right.
with God, right?
And there's no room for him on the checkerboard.
And that's right.
Okay, let me read some more. Now, a lot of these others reference things we said, but I wanted to share them because everybody took some time and trouble to think
Oh,
about it.
absolutely.
And so Kathy Irwin Glinsky said, "I really love Monica Reyes in this episode. I feel like this is one of the only times we really see the quirky and open to possibilities character that was introduced in season 8." Which is something we've already agreed with. We totally agree with you, Kathy.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think there's a gravitas to it too, because I mean, I don't want to get too deeply into season 8, but I think that she was. I think there's a seriousness to her, even though it's quirky. It's used for a purpose more, so it seems like a full realization. So I really like what Kathy had to say about it, and that she recognized that.
Yes. Meredith Roberts says Scully's sheer exasperation in reaction to him dancing around them cracks me up. And us too. And Gillian
Hmm.
Anderson too, apparently.
Right.
Paulette Janian said, I love the episode, including the music. I have watched it many times, one of my favorites of the non-Mulder episodes. I think that's the opinion of many, many
The
people.
the going opinion. Hmm.
And the music was Carl Serra, the French writer, actor, filmmaker who re-recorded pop standards from the 40s and 50s, and they just play so well. Like, one of the things I was going to say earlier was that when Chris Carter uses "I love you for sentimental reasons" at the end, it's
Hmm.
like the best use of Baby William we ever see. Scully
Oh,
comes
by
home
far.
and she's so happy to be with Baby William again, and I can't think
But
of a
it's
better
like a
time with Baby William.
no, that fits to me, and this is the thing. It's like things that I'm not so much like a fan of that part of the show, just really were like, they worked in that episode, you know, and I could see she's coming home, she's, you know, patting him and the music's playing and so forth. And it was just like a very quick, quiet moment, you know, there he is, and then go on. And I do like that. I like how he was used in that episode more than in any of the other ones in which he appeared, you know. I'm not sure why that couldn't have been sort of more of a standard. But I think it really worked in this episode, so that's enough.
Yes. Okay. Kurt North said, I love the direction and choreography. Burt Reynolds sends up the character brilliantly. I think it was wise to leave the murders off screen to keep it lighthearted. Which is another really good point. I mean, if it was so grisly, it couldn't have stayed as light and airy as it actually is. So
I agree with that. Yeah. The pictures are a little bit gruesome, but they keep the violence pretty much off screen. Like you see that it's about to happen, you know, or it's you know, you hear it happening in like a ladies' room or something, somebody screaming. That kind of gives it an older movie feel too, I think, which makes it like another layer of interesting.
yeah, sort of classic. And the sad part about that is that means we see less of Ellen Green from Little Shop of Horrors
I
and Pushing
know.
Daisies, who I love so much. And Chris Carter said on the commentary she was a real trooper during a long day of filming. She comes in and does this. She's a numerologist. And she's got to say a lot of heavy words, you know, very complicated ideas, and she just nails it, and then she's gone.
She's so great in a small part. I think that's true of a lot of the, you know, the other like, minor characters in this episode, is that they just like really make a mark in the time that they're on screen.
Definitely. Yes. Okay. Michael Little said, I like this one a lot. One of the better season 9 episodes. It is weird and goofy, sure, but I think it mostly works. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier, where you can just enjoy it for being weird and goofy, or you can read like a tremendous amount into it about God and fate and all these things.
And I think that's exactly like we were talking about, the whole sort of like theme of podcasts, you know, the different levels on which you can watch it.
And Valerie Kelly echoed the same thing. She said, I thought it was goofy and fun.
I think that Burt Reynolds as God would want us to ultimately appreciate the episode as goofy and fun. So that would be in keeping with the theme of
we should all be
appreciating
dancing
creation
through life, right?
Yes, exactly.
And
I like that Burt Reynolds came to that in his like later career into that role.
It works so tremendously well, and the key is him having fun with it. You know, he obviously had a blast. He was great with the cast and crew. He had a blast around them, hung around them, and really tried to do the best he can, and it shows.
Yes, it does.
It's one of my favorite roles of his. And as it said at the end of the opening credits, instead of "The truth is out here," Dio te amo, which means Dio te ama. God loves you.
Yeah. And Chris Carter says, Burt Reynolds loves the sinner as well as the saint.
That also is, yeah, that could be at the end of the opening credits. So before we wrap up, let's find out where listeners can find you on the internet.
I'm on Twitter.
Hashtag the amazing Marlene.
Oh, that's right. So my XCast live name now is The Amazing Marlene, but you can find me on Twitter as Marlene, which is my first name, and then MHS, which are my initials. Not super creative with the naming, which is why I'm glad you came up with my name for me. But yeah, Marlene MHS. And I have a blog, but it's not really running yet, so stay tuned for that. It's X-File related. So
I'll awesome. Okay.
Of course.
The blog is
I'll
out
get that
there.
Together. Right. But for now, Twitter.
Okay, and in addition to both of us being on the X-Files basement on Facebook all the time,
yes,
I do an X-Files rewatch with my blog. An X-Files rewatch blog with my sister called Sibling Cinema at Blogger. We also can be found with that moniker on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks to you, Marlene.
Thank you, Paige.
And remember, as always, trust no one.
The Xcast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at the Xcast, and on Facebook if you type in the Xcast, or at our group X-Files Basement, an Xcast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support the Xcast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/the Xcast. That's Patreon. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our patron roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/the Xcast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.